Ever wonder what it really takes to make zero trust work in practice? Welcome to Zero Trust Journey, the podcast that cuts through the noise and dives into real stories and strategies to bring zero trust to life. The cybersecurity world is flooded with buzzwords and vendor hype, but here we focus on what truly matters, practical insights and lessons from those who've walked the path. Each episode is inspired by real experiences, grounded in our research, and enriched by the challenges and triumphs of our guests. If you're ready to grow your skills, deepen your insights, and take actionable steps toward a stronger zero trust strategy, you've come to the right place. Let's get started. The views and opinions expressed on the Zero Trust Journey podcast, webcast are solely those of the participants and do not represent the views of their employers or affiliated organizations. This content is provided for educational and informational purposes only. Neither the employers nor any sponsors are liable for actions taken based on the content discussed.
Welcome to the Zero Trust Journey, the show that sets itself apart by focusing on real-world zero trust stories and strategies. I'm Steve Turner, co-host of the Zero Trust Journey, joined by Victor Monga, co-host and producer of the show.
Today, we are excited to bring Zach Pugh, Principal Product Manager at Menlo. Zach has served our country in the Army. Thank you, Zach, for your service. We appreciate it. Zach's very familiar with zero trust topic as he's constantly having conversation with government agencies or contractors about it. So also, Zach is CSA CCZT certified, so he is considered as part of the family. Zach, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Victor, Steve. Appreciate you guys having me on.
So usually, Zach, we start with this really critical and serious question. Do you like coffee?
Yeah, I do. It's really interesting. I have a 1-year-old at home, so I'd say on any given day, my blood is probably 50% coffee. But it's gotten to a stage now where it doesn't really do much. So I don't know what I'm drinking it for, if not to avoid the headaches. Maybe it's the taste. I haven't quite figured that out yet, but
we share the same fabric in that regard. So good. Now let's talk about zero trust. So I know this is a very familiar topic to you, and you talk to a lot of people, especially in the government sector, to actually look at their strategy, improve it, evolve it, and mature it. So let's start with this one. I know zero trust actually initiated from the government side, and now private sector is kind of catching up, which is really surprising. Usually it's the other way around when it comes to cybersecurity strategy. So tell me more about why government is pushing for zero trust. I mean, they have their own frameworks, they have their own things. Why zero trust, and why now?
yeah, well, I think it, like anything else in cyber, comes out of necessity, right? We're in a constant state of cyber war. As cyber professionals in any organization, in any role, we're part of this war. And our job is entirely to make the job of attackers harder. And the government, when they're looking at it, we're talking about national defense information. We're talking about really critical national security data. If we're looking at organizations like the IRS, we're talking about people's personal information, their social security numbers, tax information. We cannot afford to not be on the bleeding edge of these kinds of cyber frameworks and implementations. So when the government started looking at this, it was a bit of a surprise in how quickly that focus shifted. When it got introduced, I know you typically ask questions about, what did you think when it was first introduced? And my initial view was skepticism, like a lot of people. When it first came out, I'm like, oh, great, another buzzword to worry about. Now let's see what vendors decide to do with this one. And from a product perspective, I'm like, I don't want to get caught up in that madness. I want to provide my customers the right information, the right value, and make sure they're making the right decisions for their business, because ultimately that helps me as a product manager. But it really felt like Security 101 dressed up in a new package, right? We're thinking about access controls. We're thinking about micro segmentation. We're thinking about continuous monitoring, and none of these things were really new. It's just how they were positioned, and it was the organizational buy-in strategy that was kind of wrapped around that. So when it came to the government, it was like, okay, great. And a lot of the things that I find in working with agencies is they are more receptive than the commercial community to these kinds of things because of the criticality of the data. They're less focused on the revenue side, unlike the commercial, they're more focused on the security side. So that's kind of why I saw that evolve that direction, and why I think we're seeing such a foothold of zero trust in the community.
Yep, yep. So Steve and I, we do a lot of research and surveys, and we reveal it during part of these shows. And one of the things that we had learned, and when we talked to a few of the respondents, that the zero trust was a lot of necessity out of SaaS proliferation, or the BYOD, or now the remote workforce that happened during, I would say, really it took off during the COVID era, right? When it comes to government, people said they're still in the castle and moat mentality. They still have that lockdown approach. Was zero trust out of necessity because to improve security, or was it more because now government is also lenient and going towards the SaaS adoption and cloud adoption? Again, would love to see your take on that one.
I think it's both. I don't think we can necessarily put it in a monolith there and say that it is one or the other, because they kind of both happen in parallel, right? We're seeing a lot of this move brought on by COVID. We saw government agencies, kind of get struck by that and go, well, shoot, now what do we do? Law enforcement agencies were a big one when they got hit with this. They're like, well, how can we do our job from home? It was terrifying for them. Now, I think on the technology side, that was actually an easier shift than it was on the people side. You can implement technology pretty easily. You can iterate, you can move, but you can't patch people. And when we're talking about a cultural shift, which a lot of my discussions really revolve around that, it's less on technology and it's more about how do we get buy-in. It's how do we position the security program better to organizational stakeholders, to move the needle and produce value. So maybe in a critical infrastructure, we're talking about availability. Maybe if we're talking, to security functions, it really is as simple as we're going to be removing the loss expectancy of this particular item. So we're able to show a net positive in the revenue column. All of that matters, and yeah, so I don't think it was necessarily one or the other. I think it was this kind of perfect storm of things that happened all at once that were necessitated this move.
Do you, in those conversations that you've had, primarily in the government, because, I know on kind of the commercial side of things, it's getting constant buy-in from all of the folks that you talk to. It's like group by group, sector by sector. On the government side of things, do you see that, once you've kind of secured that buy-in, do you see that it's an easier path, or do you struggle kind of with the same types of conversations where, okay, I've sold this one group, or, I've sold a different, group on this. Now I have to crawl through the rest of the organization in order to, get a foothold, for establishing things.
I think it depends on the agency. The last time I checked, the U.S. government's IT system is like the largest in the world, right? So we've got so many different agencies doing so many different things, and a lot of those conversations come down to, well, this is overwhelming. There's so much to do, uh, so I'm going to resist as much as possible because change is painful, and it makes sense. There, especially in the critical infrastructure, we're talking about if it's not broke, don't fix it. A lot of legacy stuff. Again, why touch it if it's air gapped and there's less necessity to touch that kind of stuff. But when we're looking at the cultural side of things, I think you're going to encounter a lot of the same things in the gov as you are on the commercial, because it's still people. The people are still the function here. So it's all about education. It's about reinforcement. The government did a really great job of a top down approach, though. I'm thinking about 2209 when that came out and really pushed a lot of agencies to establish a program manager responsible for zero trust, and they have to report on progress. So that was a very good streamlining effort, top down, providing a ton of guidance that removed a lot of those barriers that we're still going to find on the commercial side. I don't think they went away. I think they're just a little bit less because there's more rigor, more process, and more necessity to move based on the memorandums.
And kind of around, there's a interesting comment that you made earlier that I wish more folks would kind of highlight is, all of the things that Zero Trust in the framework kind of brings about, those things existed prior to ZT. Like we all acknowledge that, it's not like all of the controls and all of those different things kind of didn't exist and ZT brought about, this revolution. But I think the interesting thing kind of around it is that Zero Trust kind of gave an organized framework for measuring those things within an organization, and organizations being able to look at, do I have technology or processes deployed to handle those things? In your experience, have you seen organizations, have a positive kind of like reception of that from that vantage point? Because I know certainly for me, still dealing with a lot of the commercial sector, there's still ZT skeptics out there, and they're like, "Oh, we're doing, access control, no problem. We've matured the heck out of that." But they're still siloed off from the rest of the organization, and there's no cohesiveness between the variety of different domains that sit underneath a zero trust framework.
Yeah, I think that that still exists in the federal sector as well. But I will say that there are great examples of the exact opposite. I'm thinking of like flank speed with the Navy and having really cohesive zero trust adoption across the board. That's the most fantastic example of an organization really coming together and implementing zero trust across the board. Now, is it done? I don't think anyone that knows zero trust is ever going to claim that they're done. It's a journey. You're going to iterate on it over time, especially as the threat landscape evolves and as your processes and people evolve. But there's going to be resistance. You're always going to encounter resistance to these kinds of things. Skeptics are going to exist, and I don't think vendors in the space are really doing any favors there by claiming, "Oh, I've got this product. If you don't have my product, you're not zero trust." Um, it's a misnomer. It's a strategy. It's not a product, which I know you guys preach a lot. I preach a lot in every conversation. Now, there are things you can do to solve particular problems, and vendors can help with that kind of thing. So, a lot of that's going to continue until the industry can kind of wrangle itself to put one succinct message out that we can help with specific pieces, but you're not going to buy it off the shelf. Every zero trust environment is going to be bespoke. It's all going to be different. You may have some sort of alignment across, different verticals, perhaps, but technology is going to be different. Your people are different. As long as your people are different, your zero trust implementation is going to be different. So, I think that will always exist. We can lessen it together, though, as vendors.
Let me take a different approach and ask you this, Zach. So some of the conversations we had with our respondents during the survey and research, it's a lot to do with that government, each agency, they have put together very comprehensive zero trust strategy documents out there. There's a lot out there. When it comes to the private sector and commercial and enterprise side, they see that as overwhelming. They see that as we don't have exact alignment to what these documents are putting out there, because a lot of those terminologies are very government focused, ITSM and ITEL, very government centric approaches. Yes, the outcome is defined in some documents, but I think when an organization starting their journey with zero trust, or they're looking into where do we go, they take all of this document and feel overwhelmed. Any suggestions, any recommendations that you can guide and be like, okay, even these documents, these strategies, and these information is out there from different government agencies. How do you actually trim it and tailor it to your organization's strategy?
Yeah, I even if I were to pick up one of those strategy guides and try to match it to any organization that I work with, that would be overwhelming. They're massive, they're complicated, and they use terminology that could even be agency specific. Um, my recommendation to anyone starting a zero trust journey is review some of the great materials that have been put out, like the CISA zero trust maturity model. That's a really easily digestible one that breaks it down into concrete steps, can give you a roadmap. Take credit for what you're already doing. So if you've got existing controls in place on the people, process, or technology side, take credit for those.
Yeah.
Recognize that you may not be starting at ground zero. And the last would be not to try to measure yourself to everyone else. Start small. If you're just starting out, you're going to make mistakes. I've seen organizations do implementations of zero trust and fail because they start too broad. Define your protect surfaces, start really small so that if you do make a mistake in one, you can apply up lessons learned. And the only thing you've done is mess up one small surface. If you're focusing it small enough, I'm thinking like, hey, we're going to code something on a serverless. Okay, well that's a lot easier to fix than if you've got like a monolithic app, and you make a mistake. So that would be my advice. And then as far as on the implementation side, don't start with your technical stakeholders. You will not be successful if you're starting with your technical
Yes.
stakeholders. I
Yes.
would say start with your business stakeholders. They need to be educated on why this is and how it benefits them. It's any good security programs implementation. Tie it back to something tangible, something valuable, how it benefits your organization.
So Zach, kind of not to dive into the weeds here, but it seems like you have a lot of experience, like in a lot of different environments. Could you tell us maybe about some like tactical wins that you've kind of either helped bridge in your role now, or kind of as you kind of helped advise organizations, even building product like to help organizations kind of realize their march towards whatever their zero trust implementation looks like? Because I know that a lot of our viewers, they're hands on keyboard, they're ready to kind of implement things, and they're always looking for stories or advice, on previous implementations or experienced folks like yourself, on what they can do or what they can avoid, as they kind of move forward.
Sure. Yeah, I'll give you two examples. I'm not going to name names, of course, for obvious reasons, but in a previous role, I was focused on identity, and that's a great portion of zero trust. I always hear this: identity is the new perimeter. It's not. It's a component, sure, but and it's an important one because but when people think of identity, they think of people, and you need to have identity of resources too. So all of those things combined. So I was working in a previous organization with a large government agency to do a modernization of their IAM program, specifically focusing on the DoD sector and the civilian sector as well. So kind of a combined effort. And the big driver to that was this zero trust plan. They wanted to be able to have a more tactical way of viewing identities, of being able to control identities, do just in time access, all of these things that map directly to your access controls. And I'll say zero trust is not complicated. Um, it's hard, but I don't think it's complicated. There are much, much smarter people than me that have designed great guidance on how to implement it. And if I can get it, I'm sure that both of you, who I know are much smarter than me, can attest to. There's a lot of people out there that get the basics of zero trust, use the guidance. In my new role, at Menlo, we focus on helping organizations with browser security, and that's often a forgotten layer when we're thinking about zero trust. But how do you access applications nowadays with the proliferation of SaaS? It's through a browser most of the time, and your browser wasn't made for that. It was made for convenience. It's not an enterprise asset. So when we go into a lot of these discussions with organizations, they're not even considering it an asset, which means immediately when you're not considering your browser as an asset, your transaction flows are wrong, your data flows are wrong, and you're not properly protecting the information. You're not doing your customers, your end users, uh, a service in protecting their data. So going into those discussions, I've been in multiple organizations that have tackled different parts of browser security because we could talk just about isolation and destroying virtual containers after sessions so that you don't have cross-site scripting, all of that kind of stuff. We could also go down the route of our product called Heat Shield, which detects and prevents, great example is phishing attempts in real time. You can go to a website, blocked. You can't do anything with it because it's being machine analyzed. We know it's phishing. That information, and we're going to block your credential input. And even if your admin decides, hey, I want to let you guys run rampant in an environment, I don't recommend that. But We have solutions like browser forensics, which can really help you on the continuous monitoring side and being able to trace forensically what your users have put into fields. Did they actually input a password? Save you tons of time when you're, tracing incidents to see what really happened, which is really important in today's like privacy landscape when we're thinking about the new breach reporting. GDPR has been around for a while, but now NIS2 and DORA with new breach reporting timelines that maybe some organizations weren't taking into account that are going to be really subject to now. So all of that I help with in my current organization and implementing zero trust. So I think it's really broad what you can tackle, and your use case matters. When you're speaking to your vendors, approach with caution, feel out, make sure you're trying to solve a very tangible problem, and then align that with your overall zero trust strategy. If they say, I can come in, make you zero trust, run for the hills as fast as you can.
If a vendor is coming in and starting with fear that if you don't buy their product, then you will not achieve zero trust, yes, run for the hills. Second, if the vendor is actually claiming that by implementation or just buying the product, you will be zero trust certified, again, bad approach. The third bad one I'm starting to hear recently are when a vendor comes in and dictates your zero trust strategy with the products only they have to sell, then again it's a bad move. Now look, I'm not gonna say it's a bad way to start, because sometimes you just don't know it. You involve a vendor, you involve a partner, you involve a reseller who have successfully actually helped other customers, other organizations. Absolutely take the insights, but don't just let them take over your strategy. That is your to own. They can help you with implementation. And again, zero trust is not just technical controls. We talked about it multiple times. So the business culture shift, we have to own it internally. So that's, I think, again, to your point, we remind it every time to our listeners that vendors who are claiming their products will achieve zero trust for you, that's a bad pitch to start with.
Yeah, and your point about the vendors dictating strategy, that is a very underrated comment. When you're going in, my recommendation is always have a strategy first, or at least a base level understanding. If you don't, use those conversations as sourcing. Not necessarily, they're not procurement discussions at that point. You're feeling out what's possible to solve the challenges that you have. But if you're not going in with a problem statement, I'd say you're already starting off on the wrong foot in your zero trust journey.
What I love that you called out, Zach, that I think is actually very underrated, and I think you're the first person that I've heard kind of call it out, is the browser is an asset within your organization. Again, I know that, technology is not kind of like front and center in a lot of these discussions, but, when you think about, you mentioned it earlier, the protect surfaces, the fact that, the browser is one of the last areas that a lot of people think of, because in most of my discussions that I have with customers, they're concerned about their thick client apps, and they're concerned about how to secure those and bridge the gaps between those and, what they're trying to achieve with zero trust. But I never ever hear anybody bring up the browser. And in an ecosystem where we're seeing, a lot of the major browser players trying to back into that, trying to shove like security on top of the convenience and all of the other things that they've tried to kind of enable over time. That's why I love the comment that you made around that. And then the other piece that I kind of wanted to call out was, Victor, we need to create a bingo board for all of the different things that have come up during this conversation. Because, Zach, I love that you said that, identity is the new perimeter. It's like, how, if we went back through time, use the Wayback Machine, I'm certain that has been said over at least the last 10 years, that identity is the new security perimeter. And so I love your call out on all of that. But, I think it'd be so great if we had a bingo board that our viewers could go to. It's like, if your vendor says this, it's like, run out of that room as fast as you can. So something else that I wanted to ask you real quick, Zach, was, so you being on the vendor side, right? Like, but also having been, like a customer yourself, you know, what, I know we've been talking about some of the things that if you hear it in a conversation, get out. Like it's, what for you turns, a vendor into a partner rather than it just being a vendor relationship? Because there are some of those old school mentality out there still in the larger ecosystem where everybody just treats a vendor like a vendor, and that gap is never kind of bridged. And we've talked about some of the things that if a vendor mentions that they're not your partner, they're not your friend, they're not going to help you kind of achieve your goals. But for you, like, what bridges that gap between a vendor being just a vendor and somebody you procure something from to somebody being a partner helping you realize, some of the goals that we've been talking about here today?
Yeah, great question. I was just having this discussion the other night at dinner with someone, and the whole notion of a partner versus a vendor to me really comes down to the questions that they're asking. So if they're wanting to know about my strategy and really trying to source, is this a good fit for me, not just viewing it as a dollar sign or a deal, um, that's a really good sign for me as as a customer of different products. Asking questions about what other technology do I use now. I know there are people in the community who don't like those types of questions, so that's okay. Um, that definitely can source some angst from people about opening up your attack surface if people know too much, which is fair. But I'll say at any given time, your vendors are going to be under NDA and they're going to know a lot more than you probably want them to know anyway. So I'm not sure you're going to solve that problem. But yeah, ask questions about strategy. What are you really trying to solve with this tool? Um, Maybe there are different ways that you can use it. There's a lot of bespoke stuff we do with customers on our own product side to solve particular challenges. And if we hadn't asked questions the right way, really probed on what were their goals and objectives on the technology side, and how do those align to your business goals and objectives, we wouldn't have gotten to where we are with those partners, and those accounts might have landed them, but they might have churned, a year later when they realized this probably isn't the right thing for me. And then as a customer, you're left a year down in your project and no real progress towards your zero trust objectives. So that's kind of the difference for me is how are they approaching the discussion?
And that's fair. I think a lot of times vendors who start with the transaction questions, hey, users, give me your applications and all that, like the traditional questions that would lead into the pretty much licensing model of their product. You're absolutely right. I think that's a bad approach. So I know we're coming close to our wrap of this segment. So Zach, from here, if you want to give advice to our listeners who are either starting or maturing and evolving into zero trust journey, what would you say? Like, hey, go check these three things, or go make a list, or here are the things that you may want to ask your vendor next time. What is that advice that you want to leave our listeners today?
I would say seek out as much knowledge as you can. There's so much out there nowadays. Notable people, John Kindervog. You've got, I think Steve. You even did some stuff at Forrester around zero trust. So there's a lot of great stuff out there. There's a lot of great speakers out there. Chase Cunningham's another one.
Hmm.
It's Doctor Zero Trust. Go seek out as much knowledge as you can. Learn, absorb it, and then really try to bake that into how does this apply to my organization, because not all of it will.
Yeah.
You'll have to pick and figure out what's the model that's right here. I'd also say seek out training for your team. If your team's going to be involved in projects, you're expecting that kind of stuff, get some uh, you know real zero trust training. I'm not this isn't sponsored by CSA or anything like that, but their CCCT is a great starting point to just lay a
Yes.
foundation of what zero trust really is, and cut through a lot of the noise. If I Google zero trust right now, I'm just going to end up confused most of the time because of all of the vendor statements out there and all of the conflicting information, sometimes a lot of bad information. So seek out knowledge, go to as many sources as you can, and then try to understand how does it apply to me.
Perfect. I think I I couldn't say it differently or better, because, as you said, vendors have a lot of disinformation, misinformation. Go to the authentic sources and get the right information and build your strategy and tailor it to your organization.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Steve, anything to wrap this segment?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again, Zach, for coming on the show. It was such a pleasure to meet you and get some of your insights for our awesome listeners out there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks.
thanks for having me. And for any of the audience, if you have any questions for me, please reach out anytime on LinkedIn. I love Zero Trust conversations.
Thanks for joining us on Zero Trust Journey. If this episode sparked new ideas or gave you practical insights, be sure to like, subscribe, and share it with your network. Your support helps us continue bringing you valuable conversations and real-world stories. We'd love to hear from you. Share your feedback or even your own Zero Trust journey by reaching out to us. Your story could inspire others in the community. Stay tuned for more expert insights, compelling stories, and actionable advice to help you advance your Zero Trust strategy. Until next time, stay curious and keep making progress on your Zero Trust journey. See you in the next episode.